only is it prophesied to come, it marked the year prophetically, with John's astronomical dating. It was not incidentally, within 1 year, of a Vatican declaration entitled the Edite Sep, which once again, declared Rome's intent, to dominate and rule the world over every nation, and thus fulfill its rightful ownership, of all things. Within the very next year after the declaration, the fourth saucer judgment began. That today, came to be known as global warming. As you see on the chart published on the website, climatecentral.org, from data published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the last record cold was in 1911, and after that there has been a continuous rising of global temperature surface. The genuine Christians of America disappeared about 100 years ago, with the rise of C.I. Scofield and Jesuit futurism. The seeds of Jesuit futurism has brought a full harvest of the kind of Christianity that authored it. Mega church, which is commonly used among evangelicals today, is the intentional adaptation of Constantine Christianity, who worship the sun. He also coined the very first use of the term, mega church. Thus why it is used today. Mega church, which was coined by the Emperor Constantine, was the first use of the term ecclesia to mean a Roman temple, which at the time was called the Thea Sophia, which means the goddess wisdom. Taken directly from a title discovered in the Nag Hammadi Library of Hidden Gnostic Scriptures, from Egypt. You should read what Constantine was naming his mega ecclesia after. A link will be provided in the description section below. The Gnostic book entitled The Sophia of Jesus Christ mentions the Trinity, derived directly from the Egyptian Ogdoads, which John called 3 unclean spirits like frogs, which are devils, in Revelation 16, verse 13 and 14. His prophecy was completely accurate, historically. John mentions 2 important truths in the text that was conveniently left buried in the mistranslation of verse 18. The first is his reference to the season of the dead, and the second is that the season of the dead destroyed the land. And it was because of that the judgment of the 7th trumpet judgment would be brought. And it turned out to be one of the greatest natural disasters ever witnessed in recorded history. If you Google the question, what is the greatest annual environmental disaster? It will return 456 million results. And you will get the uncontested results that it is Christmas against the Antichrist, and which could not exist if the Antichrist were not already here. And the only Christians who can't actually see that are the very ones that are too busy worshipping Apollyon, the Roman sun god, associated with 3 unclean spirits, which are devils. If you are a Christian devil worshipper, for your sake, and the sake of your children, and even your own future, please consider repenting. We'll be glad you did. So far, we have discovered that the language in the Textus Receptus doesn't correlate directly with the King James Version translation into English in the texts of Revelation, because of culturally related Hebrew idioms, theological evasion in the selection of tertiary lexicon definitions for the words, and the practice of unnecessary transliterations, or inappropriate transliterations, into the English text. When we produce reconstructions of those texts, we discover that the Greek word angelos, or angels, means messengers. Earth means land. Bowls means saucers. And blood means, like blood, not literal blood. And that the first 4 saucer judgments are already here, fulfilling the language of the texts, as they have been written. We have a timeline of prophecies that begin in 1806, for the first prophecy about skin sores, from the sun. Then, in 1844 and 1878, we have the beginning of events for the plagues, of seawater, and fresh water. Then 1911, for the beginning of the 4th saucer judgment, which was the increase in heat and fires, from the sun, which we are currently experiencing as well. The next major event, in the timeline, is the year 1914 to 1918. But this event is out of sequence. In the text, the event is described textually located, in the narrative, between the 6th and 7th saucer judgment. But its occurrence actually takes place historically, between the 4th and 5th saucer judgment, on the timeline. So what accounts for this anomalous non-sequential occurrence? The answer to that question exists in the text itself, in chapter 16, verses 13 through 16. And it reads as follows, quote, "And I saw out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits, like frogs. They are the spirits of demons, making miracles, which go out to the kings of the land, and the empire's whole assembly, to fight against that day, of the great God Almighty. Behold, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one awake, and guarding his clothes, so that he does not walk naked and ashamed. And they assembled themselves, into the place, called in Hebrew, Armageddon." End quote. In the previous text, John describes the 6th saucer judgment, which is the drying up of the Euphrates River, and which reads as follows, quote, "And the 6th messenger poured his saucer upon the great river Euphrates, and dried the water, to prepare the way, for the kingdoms of Anatolia." End quote. And then, in the following text, John describes the 7th saucer judgment, which reads as, quote, "And the 7th messenger poured his saucer into the air, and a great voice came forth, from the dwelling in heaven, from the throne, saying, Cause to be. And there came sounds and thunders and lightnings, and an earthquake came, such as not has come, from the time men have been upon the land." End quote. But sandwiched in the middle, between these texts, is verse 13 through 16. And what occurs, is a parenthetical paragraph. There are several markers within the text, that demonstrate it is a parenthetical paragraph. The first indication, is his reference to an event, which already occurred in his previous timeline, in Revelation chapter 13, where he describes the identity of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. In chapter 13, the dragon is Caesar, or the head of the Roman Empire, the beast is the Roman Pontifex Maximus, who is given his throne by the dragon, which is the Roman Empire, and the false prophet, or Eastern Patriarch, who introduces icons, and calls fire down from heaven. Here in this text, he brings up the 3 unclean spirits, that come out of their mouth. The mouth was also prophetically identified as John Chrysostom. The name, actually meant, the golden mouth. The entire timeline, as shown on your screen, for that information occurred between the years, 313 AD to 440 AD. And John identifies the 3 unclean spirits, as a religious doctrine, that goes out to the kings of the empire. And that had already occurred, precisely as John prophesied. It was from Egypt, as indicated by frogs, and it was originally called the 3 Ogdoads, which were Egyptian frog thought to be involved in creation. However, in the Nag Hammadi library, the Ogdoads, which were originally 8, had been modified to 3, and referred to as the 3 trimale spirits, which you saw in the Sophia of Jesus Christ, which Constantine named his first church after, the Thea Sophia, which was a personification of the mother of creation. You see the Edict of Thessalonica, which occurred on our historical timeline, in the year 380 AD. Now here is the occurrence of the first 4 saucer judgments and Armageddon. As you can see, on the timeline, John is describing previous historical events. Verse 13 and verse 14 are flashbacks. So that was, in essence, a literary flashback, which actually had already occurred in history. Here, he identifies the religious doctrine prophetically, as unclean spirits, which are devils. They are said to be unclean, in that they violate the greatest commandment, given by Christ, and also because unclean spirits are typically associated with idolatry, which he also references in the rise of the patriarch that introduced the practice of worshipping icons, which biblically observant Middle Eastern Jews, including John, would have considered a form of idolatry. So John is clearly referring to an earlier event and his prophecies. It is something that doesn't actually occur between the 6th and the 7th saucer judgments. It happened centuries before both of these events. And the final indication that this is non-sequential is that he prefaces what he is about to say with the description that God, not Christ, comes as a thief in the night, and warning people not to be caught, naked and ashamed, by the event. And then John states, they assembled themselves into the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. The they he is referring to is the assembly of the empire. And then he warns and explicitly cautions the timing of the text is non-sequential. He explicitly states the time of this event will be a surprise. Then there is an end of the parenthetical paragraph. And then he returns to the sequence with a resumption of the chronology with saucer number 7. So we have this event which backtracks history by several centuries and then concludes forward with Armageddon. Christ is not said to return in this text. There is no rapture mentioned, and there is no end of the world mentioned, and there is no second coming of Christ mentioned, either. Those are all theological concepts transposed onto this text, which mentions none of these ideas. God is referenced by the phrase Great God Almighty, and then God is introduced into the narrative as the immediate speaker. He writes the words, quote, "Behold, I come as a thief in the night." End quote. He introduces the narrative that speaks to him by the previous reference as God Almighty, not Christ. That's the second problem. We have the narrative of God speaking, not Christ. In Genesis 11, God comes down to the Tower of Babel to see, to inspect. And that is precisely what the narrative John is alluding now to. It is the assembly of Babylon he mentioned earlier in Revelation 14, when he referenced the wine of Babylon. This is God coming down to see the works of Babel, not the return of Christ, and not the end of the world. There is no immediate or explicit reference to Christ directly in this text. But he is being unmistakably implied in the events which will occur in the sign in the heavens about the event. So what is this all about? If there is no rapture mentioned, and there is no second coming of Christ mentioned, but there is a physical battle mentioned, and it does include the assembly of the empire, then what is this all about? That is precisely what we are about to find out next. The Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon is one of the most documented prophecies in Christian history. There is no question it existed. But they never tell you its history. And the fulfillment of the prophecy of the Battle of Armageddon is one of the most documented biblical fulfillments in history. But they will never even tell you it already occurred. Armageddon was fully known. Armageddon was prophesied for centuries. And the final Battle of Armageddon factually occurred and fulfilled all those previous prophecies. That is, the ones that were actually in the Bible, not the ones that were only found in the head of a lot of scam artists, counter-reformationists, preachers, imaginations. Along with zombies and flying people, and Nikes, and magic demon bugs, from magical bottomless pits. Those are things you will never see, because they are make-believe, and counter-reformation, superstitious ignorance. They go along with selling indulgences, and prostituting religion for money. If you point out that the Battle of Armageddon was prophesied long ago, and it occurred. Counter-reformationists will immediately start the excuse-making. Counter-reformationists have never met an excuse they didn't like. And that should give you an idea of what counter-reformationists are really up to. It is all about the excuse-making for Rome. But if that is all you can ever see, then that is all you will ever find. The sad truth about the brainwashing job that Counter-Reformation Christianity has done against Christians in the United States is that most people do not even know there has been a prophesied Armageddon. And it has happened. And it was the largest war ever in the history of the world up to that point. And it culminated in prophetic history that profoundly and permanently changed the entire world. Yet, despite the shocking historical development that had been prophesied for centuries, down to the exact military participants, and down to the exact year, despite all this, common modern Christians do not even have the foggiest notion it ever happened. How on earth could this possibly be? What happened? Why is there a complete collective amnesia in 332 million American Christians? And why does it exist? What has it been engineered to accomplish? The answers to those questions will be quite shocking, and we will get into that in the last part of this video. But the truth about the Battle of Armageddon will sound nothing like the typical excuses you will be offered by Counter-Reformation sources to explain this completely unexplainable phenomena. That is, if you were lucky enough to even know enough to ask that very question. The answer to that question will come in the form of a Counter-Reformation papal decree or encyclical, entitled the Edite Sep, issued in the year 1910. That encyclical has been mentioned in the previous video on the Fourth Saucer Judgment because of its immense global consequence. It was the final phase of the Counter-Reformation unleashed by the Church of Rome. And within 1 year, the Earth's climate began to irretrievably warm as a result. That too was prophesied long ago as the fourth of 7 of the last saucer judgments against the Antichrist. Armageddon was actually fully known and prophesied for centuries. The following is a timeline chart which shows the events of the Battle of Armageddon in history. As you can see from the timeline chart, they go as far back as 358 years. These are not all the examples that exist out there, but they are representative of what was common knowledge and commonly available information to any minister or preacher earlier in American history. As far back as nearly 4 full centuries before the Battle of Armageddon actually occurred in history, these texts were known, cited, and given textual commentary on, all of which actually happened in the actual Battle of Armageddon. The following is from the 1560 Geneva Bible, translator's notes, and was published by Sir Rowland Hill of Salton, England, on the English translation of the Geneva Bible. On the text of its reference to the Battle of Armageddon, from Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, Sir Rowland Hill states in his translation notes, quote, "Now it is certain by the Holy Scriptures, that Megiddo is a city and territory in the tribe of Manasseh, bordering on Issachar and Asher, and was made famous by the lamentable overthrow of King Josias. In this mountain country, God says by figure or type, that the kings of the people, who serve the beast, shall meet together." End quote. That is a time greater than the entire history of the United States of America. A very famous English biblical scholar, cited by every major evangelical in history, including both George Whitefield and Charles Spurgeon, was Matthew Henry. Matthew Henry's concise commentary on the New Testament was published in the year 1710, 2 full centuries before the Battle of Armageddon occurred. That was a period of time larger than the American Revolution to the American Bicentennial celebration in 1976. Farther away in history than even that. Matthew Henry, as did all Protestants, interpreted the beast, the dragon and the false prophet all to be identifiable reference to the papacy as the prophesied Antichrist, and its associated idolatry. In his commentary remarks on Revelation chapter 16, verses 12 through 16, Matthew Henry states concerning this prophecy that, quote, "This probably shows the destruction of the Turkish power, and of the idolatry, and that a way will be made for the return of the Jews." End quote. That was it. That was the prophecy concerning Armageddon, from Matthew Henry, in 1710. 208 years before the actual Battle of Armageddon, in history. Next, 170 years before the Battle of Armageddon, we have the English Baptist Reverend John Gill. John Gill's exposition of the New Testament was completed and published in the year 1748. In his remarks on Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, he states, quote, "These will gather them together, and will persuade the papal and Mahometan powers, the remains of them in the several parts of the world, to join together, and make one effort, for the reviving of their declining and almost ruined interests, into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon, which may be the same with Har-Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo." And this refers also to the valley of Megiddo, which occasioned such mourning, that it became proverbial for any great sorrow, whereas is called the valley of Megiddon. Barak, in Judges chapter 5, verse 19, suggesting that the same fate would be the fate of these united powers. End quote. According to historicists, that was the Battle of Armageddon in the Bible. And nothing more. About a century before Armageddon, the Princeton-educated, Presbyterian minister, Albert Barnes, published his notes to the New Testament, 83 years before the actual Battle of Armageddon. Quote, "The Battle of Megiddo, in accordance with the interpretation suggested on Revelation 16 verses 13 and 14, we may look for something that would be well represented by a combined effort on the part of Mohammedanism and Romanism. We should look for some simultaneous movement, and something will occur which would be well represented by the decisive conflicts in the Valley of Megiddo. Mohammedanism and Romanism should stake all their interests on the issue of a single battle. Nothing in the prophecy prevent the supposition that these combined powers may be overthrown in some fierce conflict with Christian powers." End quote. That is all Albert Barnes says about it. That's it. That's the Battle of Armageddon, in the scriptures. It's a battle in Megiddo, and the combined empires loses. 33 years before the Battle of Armageddon, Henry Guinness, the very famous Irish Protestant evangelist and missionary, published his last work before he died, in the year 1885, entitled Light for the Last Days. In his work, he interpreted the scriptures to signify the year as 1917, for the culmination of the prophecy. He died in 1910, 4 years before World War I broke out. In the margin of his text, he had written the additional date of 1948, marking the year of the completion of the age of the Gentiles, in the prophecy given by Christ, in connection to Jerusalem, in Luke chapter 21, verse 24. So, Protestant historicists prophesied over a span of 3.5 centuries, that there would be a battle at Megiddo called Armageddon. It would result in the defeat of the historical remains empire, and it would result in a restoration of the Jews to Israel. And that was all they prophesied. You can even look these things up in their still used commentaries. Next, we will look at how those prophecies from Revelation 16 were actually fulfilled in real history. Origin of the Holy Roman Empire. Also known as the First Reich. During as late as the time of the Holy Roman Empire, the title Caesar was still being used. The Holy Roman Empire was a complex political entity that existed from around 800 AD to 1806 AD, and it was centered in Central Europe. The Holy Roman Empire's historical roots, or the First Reich, are traced to the time of the coronation of Charlemagne as Emperor of the Carolingian Empire, in 800 AD by Pope Leo III. The empire's territory encompassed much of present-day Central Europe, including parts of modern Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland, Belgium, the Czech Republic, and the Netherlands. This period of history is referenced in the videos on Chapter 9, and the emergence of the long hairs and cavalry armor, mentioned prophetically in Chapter 9. The title Holy Roman Empire was adopted in the 10th century to emphasize its connection to the ancient Roman Empire, and its claim to be the defender of Christianity. Throughout its history, the empire faced challenges from powerful feudal lords, papal authority, and external invasions. Despite its vast territories, the Holy Roman Empire was characterized by a fragmented political structure, with numerous independent territories ruled by various princes and nobles. The empire's influence declined significantly in the later centuries, and it ultimately became a loosely connected confederation before being officially dissolved by Emperor Francis II, after its defeat, during the Napoleonic Wars in 1806. Understanding what really happened during the Reformation. Most Christians are not aware that theological and ecclesiological elements of Luther's teachings were not actually embraced by the head of the German Church, who was Frederick III, also known as Frederick the Wise. While Frederick was a protector and supporter of Martin Luther, he did not entirely accept or implement Luther's reforms. Some of the key theological points that Frederick III did not adopt were: 1. Theological reforms. While Frederick appreciated Luther's critiques of indulgences and abuses within the Catholic Church, he did not embrace Luther's theology of justification by faith or sola scriptura. Frederick remained cautious about theological changes that could lead to greater division within the Church of the Holy Roman Empire. 2. Mass. Luther had proposed a new order of worship which simplified the Catholic Mass, and proposed its conduct in the German language. While some parts of this reform were introduced in Saxony, Frederick was hesitant to implement it, considering the diverse religious sentiments within his territory. 3. Monastic reforms. Luther's teachings on the rejection of monastic vows and the dissolution of monasteries met with resistance from Frederick. Frederick was more cautious in his approach towards monastic reforms and preferred to protect and preserve some of the monastic institutions in Saxony. 4. Iconoclasm. Luther's stance on the removal of religious images and icons from churches was not accepted by Frederick. While Frederick allowed some churches to remove the images, he did not support any destruction of religious art, even if they were idols. Smashing idols, as reformers wanted, would have amounted to an unimaginable loss of wealth from the Holy Roman Empire's property. 5. Justification by faith alone. One of the central teachings of Martin Luther was the doctrine of justification by faith alone, sola fide in Latin, which emphasized that salvation is received through faith in Christ's atoning work, rather than through human works or merit. Frederick had reservations about fully accepting this doctrine. He preferred a more cautious approach, seeking to maintain a balance between the Reformers and the established Catholic Church. 6. Mass and Eucharistic theology. Frederick also did not embrace Luther's views on the sacraments, particularly the doctrine of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Luther taught that the bread and wine in the Lord's Supper were merely symbolic, and not the true body and blood of Christ, while Frederick still preferred an interpretation similar to the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. 7. Church authority and ecclesiology. While Frederick supported Luther's critique of papal authority and corruption within the Catholic Church, he did not accept a complete break from the institutional Church. Frederick, as the ruler of Saxony, sought to reform the Church from within, preserving its hierarchical structure and maintaining his role as the protector of the Church in his territories. 8. Luther taught Christmas celebrations were superstitious, and lacked any foundation in biblical texts. And Luther had serious concerns about secret societies, as quasi-religious and mystical groups, and certain Roman Catholic religious orders. He believed that such societies were promoting teachings and practices that deviated from true Christian faith, and were harmful to the Church. But Frederick III of Saxony refused to implement both of Martin Luther's calls to abolish Christmas, or ban its secret societies. 10. Catholic residuals. In some regions of Germany, Frederick III's own version of the so-called Lutheran Reformation resulted in a significant retention of certain Catholic practices and traditions. For instance, the use of religious images and sacramental elements were actually preserved under the label of Lutheran churches, while these practices were more even explicitly rejected in the Church of England. As a ruler, Frederick III's primary focus was on maintaining stability of the Holy Roman Empire within his territories, and managing the religious changes that came with his Reformation. He was most of all concerned with preserving social order. He supported Luther's work in reforming the Church, but did not implement all of Luther's theological and ecclesiastical proposals in his territories. Frederick III was a pragmatist and a skilled diplomat. He sought to maintain a delicate balance between supporting Luther's efforts to reform the Church on the one hand, and yet preserving the stability of the Holy Roman Empire within his realm on the other. As the ruler of Saxony, Frederick retained significant control over ecclesiastical matters within his territories. He did not fully implement Luther's recommendations, or abolish certain traditional practices. The continuance of sacred days and Christmas were examples of Frederick's stamp on what eventually became the final German church, known today as the quote, Lutheran Church. End quote. Frederick III, Elector of Saxony, had a profound and lasting impact on the final form of the German Lutheran Church, just as significant as Martin Luther himself. While Luther was the theological and spiritual catalyst of the Reformation, Frederick's political support, religious tolerance, and pragmatic approach played a defining role in shaping the final course and outcome of the German Reformation. Or in other words, rather, how much of it? It really wasn't. Frederick III of Saxony remained a full member of the Holy Roman Empire during his rule, which lasted from 1486 until his death in 1525. He played a significant role within the empire, as an elector, which was a high-ranking prince, whose vote was crucial in the election of the Catholic, Holy Roman Emperor, still referred to as Caesar. Frederick III was a supporter of the Catholic Church and maintained his membership in the empire, despite his protection and support of Martin Luther and the early Reformation movement. During Frederick III's rule, he managed to maintain a delicate political balance between his loyalty to the Holy Roman Empire and his protection of Luther and the Protestant Reformation. His support and refusal to hand Luther over to the authorities at the Diet of Worms in 1521 helped the Reformation movement gain momentum in Saxony and beyond. However, it's important to note that Frederick III did not formally break with the Holy Roman Empire, or embrace Protestantism during his lifetime. It was his successor, John the Steadfast, who officially adopted the final version of Frederick III's reforms in Saxony as the official state religion after Frederick's death, which came to be known as Lutheranism, the chief architect and final editors of whom had actually been Frederick III, not Martin Luther. And John the Steadfast, also known as John the Constant, also continued the membership of Saxony in the Holy Roman Empire during his rule. John succeeded his cousin, Frederick III of Saxony, as Elector of Saxony in 1525, after Frederick's death. Despite his support for the Reformation, John the Steadfast did not break away from the Holy Roman Empire. Instead, he navigated a careful diplomatic path, trying to preserve his territorial autonomy and religious beliefs inspired by Frederick III, while maintaining a somewhat uneasy relationship with the Catholic, Holy Roman Emperor, and other Catholic rulers within the empire. None of Frederick's reforms included any repentance from Christmas, repentance from the three unclean spirits of the Roman Trinity, or withdrawal from submission to the Roman Caesar, also referred to as the dragon in John's prophecies. At the Treaty of Westphalia, religious tolerance was granted to princes in the Holy Roman Empire to choose between state versions of Lutheranism, Calvinism or Catholicism for their kingdoms. All of the supposedly Protestant religions, which came out of the Treaty of Westphalia, were still versions of state religion, headed by the king of the Holy Roman Empire. These so-called versions of Protestantism were like Frederick's Lutheranism, not based on the reformers from which they derived their names. All of these state versions of Christianity, all, without exception, still kept Christmas, and made the three unclean spirits Roman Trinity doctrine state law. That kept the dragon and the worship of his image, described prophetically by John, fully and completely intact, despite the protests of the actual reformers they took those names from. And eventually, it was these very kingdoms which fought against the day of God Almighty in Armageddon, precisely as had been prophesied by John. The history of the Second Reich begins with the collapse of the First Reich in 1806. The First Reich, also known as the Holy Roman Empire, came to an end in 1806, when Emperor Francis II abdicated the imperial title due to pressure from Napoleon Bonaparte during the Napoleonic Wars. The empire dissolved, marking the end of the medieval political structure that had endured for over 1,000 years. During the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon's French Empire exerted significant influence over the German-speaking territories. The German lands were reorganized into a series of French client states, such as the Confederation of the Rhine, which replaced many of the traditional German states. After Napoleon's defeat, the Congress of Vienna was convened to reorganize Europe. The Congress redrew the map of Germany, and restored many of the pre-Napoleonic states, while creating a loose German confederation, to promote cooperation and security among the German-speaking states. During the 19th century, various nationalist and liberal movements arose in German-speaking regions, advocating for greater unity and political reform. Prominent figures like Otto von Bismarck played pivotal roles in the final unification of Germany. On January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors, at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed Emperor and Kaiser, or Caesar, of the newly unified German Empire. This event marked the beginning of the Second Reich, with Otto von Bismarck as its chancellor. King Wilhelm of Prussia was a member of the House of Hohenzollern, which was an ancient royal family from the medieval Holy Roman Empire. Originally, the House of Hohenzollern ascended into prominence, through marriage, into the Margraviate of Brandenburg in 1415. The Margraviate of Brandenburg was a territorial entity within the Holy Roman Empire, located in the northeastern part of present-day Germany. It was originally established, in the early Middle Ages, as a frontier march border region, to defend the eastern borders of the Holy Roman Empire, against Slavic tribes. The House of Hohenzollern's acquisition of the Margraviate of Brandenburg occurred when Frederick VI of Hohenzollern, also known as Frederick I of Brandenburg, married Princess Elizabeth of Bavaria-Landshut, who was the heiress to the Margraviate of Brandenburg. Through this marriage, the Hohenzollerns gained control over the territory, and it marked a significant step in their rise to power and prominence. From this point on, the House of Hohenzollern steadily expanded its holdings, influence, and status within the Holy Roman Empire. The House of Hohenzollern has a rich history, and has played a significant role in the governance of various German territories and states over the centuries. They were one of the most influential ruling families in Germany, with their origins tracing back to the Middle Ages. Wilhelm I was the son of King Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia and Queen Louise of Prussia. He inherited his position as King of Prussia upon the death of his brother, King Friedrich Wilhelm IV, in 1861. Under his rule, and with the guidance of his Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the German Empire was unified and established in 1871. As a member of the Royal House of Hohenzollern, Wilhelm I held a significant place in German history, and played a pivotal role in the creation of the Second Reich in 1871. The Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, was a committed Lutheran. Otto von Bismarck's Kulturkampf, translated into English as Culture Struggle, was a domestic policy between 1871 and 1878. Bismarck, the Chancellor of the German Empire at the time, sought to restrain the overwhelming influence of the Catholic Church on German society and politics. The Kulturkampf arose as Bismarck's response to the growing power and influence of the Catholic Church within the new German Empire, which Bismarck viewed as a threat to the newly unified German state. He believed that the allegiance of Catholics to the Church, especially those in southern Germany, could undermine the loyalty of German citizens to the nation. Ultimately, Bismarck's Kulturkampf did not achieve its intended goals. Instead of weakening the Catholic Church, it strengthened the resolve of German Catholics to resist state interference in religious affairs. By the late 1870s, Bismarck recognized the failure of the policy. Otto von Bismarck abandoned the Kulturkampf, or culture struggle, for several reasons, primarily due to its lack of success and the increasing political difficulties it posed for his government. The Kulturkampf had faced considerable opposition and had not achieved the desired results Bismarck had initially sought. The Kulturkampf in Germany was highly unpopular among his very own German Lutherans. The policies and measures implemented during the Kulturkampf faced significant resistance and opposition, leading to widespread discontent and political challenges for Otto von Bismarck's government. In the end, the Kulturkampf's unpopularity and its lack of success contributed to its gradual dismantling and the establishment of a more cooperative relationship between the German government and the Catholic Church. During the Kulturkampf culture struggle in Germany, the policies implemented by Otto von Bismarck faced opposition from various quarters, including elite families and the electorate. While Bismarck and his government pursued the Kulturkampf to reduce the influence of the Catholic Church in Germany, the measures were met with significant resistance for several reasons, one of which was that Germany's elite families and conservative political factions were against it, many of whom were Lutheran or Protestant, and were hesitant to support the Kulturkampf. They were concerned about potential state interference in religious affairs and viewed the policies as a threat to religious freedom and individual liberties. Wilhelm II became the German Emperor and King of Prussia in 1888, succeeding his father, Wilhelm I, and consequently inherited the ongoing Kulturkampf policies. Initially, Wilhelm II had a relatively positive relationship with Bismarck, who had been the Chancellor since 1871. Bismarck had been the architect of German unification and the driving force behind many of the policies, including the Kulturkampf. As the young emperor took the throne, he viewed Bismarck as a mentor and guide, and he showed deference to the experienced chancellor. However, Wilhelm II's reign marked a significant shift in the political landscape of Germany. Unlike his predecessors, who had largely allowed Bismarck to govern without interference, Wilhelm II sought a more active role in governing the country. He favored a more ambitious imperial foreign policy and sought to assert his authority in domestic matters. Regarding the Kulturkampf, Wilhelm II became concerned about the ongoing tensions and conflicts arising from the Kulturkampf. He also recognized the political challenges posed by the strong opposition from the Catholic Church and from the Vatican. In 1890, tensions between Wilhelm II and Bismarck came to a head, and the emperor dismissed Bismarck from his position as chancellor. Bismarck's policies, including the Kulturkampf, were subsequently modified and scaled back under the new government. After Bismarck's departure, Wilhelm II took a more conciliatory approach toward the Catholic Church. He aimed to improve relations with the Catholic community and reduce the antagonism that had characterized the earlier years of the Kulturkampf. In summary, Bismarck's departure from the government led to a shift in policies and a more cooperative stance toward the Catholic Church under Wilhelm II's reign. Under Wilhelm II's reign, the relationship between the German government and the Catholic Church underwent a significant shift compared to the earlier years of the Kulturkampf under Bismarck. Wilhelm II's reign marked an improvement in relations with the Jesuit community as well. During the Kulturkampf, the Jesuits, as a prominent Catholic religious order, faced particular scrutiny and stringent measures under Bismarck's government. They were perceived as a symbol of Catholic opposition and influence, and as a result, their activities were severely curtailed. However, under Wilhelm II's government, there was a lift on restrictions concerning anti-government religious orders, including the Jesuits. This represented a significant improvement from the stricter policies of the Kulturkampf era. When Wilhelm II ascended to the throne in 1888, there was initial enthusiasm and hope among many Germans, as he was a young and energetic ruler who represented a new era for the country. In the early years of his reign, Wilhelm II's personality and actions, such as his speeches and public appearances, garnered attention and contributed to his popularity. He had a strong nationalist and militaristic stance, which appealed to some segments of German society, including conservative and nationalist groups. Between 1871 and 1890, the Second Reich experienced a very brief attempt to install Lutheranism as the official state religion in Germany, under Otto von Bismarck, for which his service was ultimately dismissed, and for the greater ambitions of a Second Reich, by the ancient royal family, of the previous Holy Roman Empire. The Second Reich had become a proxy state, for papal ambitions, to re-establish the Holy Roman Empire. The actual trajectory of the three Reichs, in German history, continued unabated except for 19 years, between 1871 to 1890, when the Lutheran Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, was finally forced out of service. The Lutheran Church in Germany then, was no more Lutheran then, than it had been since its beginning, under Frederick III. And to illustrate the consistent and continuing trajectory of all three Reichs, of the Holy Roman Empire, when the Second Reich had finally collapsed in its defeat, after the Battle of Armageddon, Caesar Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate on November 9, 1918, in the aftermath of Germany's defeat in World War I. Following his abdication, Wilhelm II went into exile in the Netherlands. The Dutch government granted him asylum, and he lived in relative seclusion at Huisdoorn, a country estate in the Netherlands. While the two never met in person, They corresponded through several letters and messages. Wilhelm II saw in Hitler a leader who could restore the Reich's power and influence on the world stage. He believed that Hitler shared his commitment to German nationalism and military strength. Wilhelm II praised Hitler's domestic and foreign policies, such as the remilitarization of the Rhineland and Germany's withdrawal from the League of Nations. When Adolf Hitler invoked the term Holy Roman Empire in his rhetoric and propaganda, it was not even particularly controversial among contemporary Lutheran Germans. Instead, Hitler's use of historical references like the Holy Roman Empire was intended to appeal to a sense of historical continuity and legitimacy for his expansionist and nationalist agenda. His rhetoric and use of historical symbols were effective in resonating with many Germans who sought a strong and unified nation. When Hitler referred to the Third Reich, he sought to establish his regime as the successor to previous German empires, including the medieval Holy Roman Empire and the Second Reich, the German Empire under Wilhelm II. In doing so, Hitler attempted to portray the Nazi regime as the pinnacle of Germany's historical development, drawing on historical symbols and terminology to strengthen his message. It is true that the historical Holy Roman Empire was associated with Catholicism, and the Second Reich under Wilhelm II had predominantly Lutheran influences. However, Hitler's propaganda machine aimed to transcend religious divisions and present a unified national identity under the banner of Nazism, and a completely watered-down politicized version of Christianity called positive Christianity, which amounted to meaning nothing. Precisely as the kind of counter-reformation, positive Christianity, we now have in America. During the early years of Hitler's rule, many Germans were drawn to his promises of economic prosperity, restoration of national pride, and strong leadership. The use of historical references, including the term Third Reich, contributed to the regime's popular appeal, by evoking a sense of continuity with a powerful and illustrious German past. Including the praise of Wilhelm II, who was himself a direct surviving descendant of one of the most ancient medieval German royal families of the First and original Holy Roman Empire. The Reichskonkordat was signed by Adolf Hitler's representatives and Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII. The agreement was officially titled the Concordat between the Holy See and the German Reich, which was then signed in Rome, Italy, on July 20, 1933. The Reichskonkordat was an important treaty between the Holy See, or the Vatican, and Nazi Germany, and it aimed to regulate the relationship between the Catholic Church and the Nazi regime. The agreement guaranteed certain rights and privileges to the Catholic Church in Germany. Also, under the adoring eyes of Wilhelm II from the Netherlands. So much for Germany's alleged Reformation, in light of its much more important Holy Roman Reichs. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, founded around the turn of the 14th century in Anatolia by Osman I, emerged as a powerful Muslim state with a unique blend of religious and political orientation. It was initially an Islamic caliphate, and its rulers, known as sultans, were both political and religious leaders. The empire expanded rapidly, encompassing large parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Europe. Over the centuries, the Ottomans developed a strong Sunni Islamic identity, and Islamic law played a significant role in their governance. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Ottoman Empire formed an alliance with the Second Reich, the German Empire, in an effort to counterbalance the influence of other European powers in the region and to strengthen their military and economic capabilities. This alliance was partly driven by shared geopolitical interests and a desire to enhance their positions on the global stage. However, this alliance ultimately played a role in the complex web of alliances that contributed to the outbreak of World War I. The Ottoman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, which includes the German-speaking territories, were significant political entities during the same period. They interacted with each other in the context of military conflicts, territorial disputes, and geopolitical maneuvering. The Ottomans engaged in conflicts with the Holy Roman Empire and its allies on several occasions, most notably during the Siege of Vienna in 1529 and 1683. These confrontations were part of the broader complex relations between the Muslim Ottomans and the Christian states of Europe during the time of the Reformation and Counter-reformation movements. At the time of the historicist commentaries concerning the prophecies in Revelation 16, pointing prophetically to the Battle of Megiddo, or Armageddon, the Muslim Turkish Empire, known as the Ottoman Empire, was not even an ally of the Holy Roman Empire. They were not only on polar opposite sides, but were even actual military enemies during the time of these prophecies, and it seemed to be an incredibly far stretch prophetically to suggest that the Reich would ever be aligned with the Muslim powers of Mohammedanism at the coming Battle of Armageddon. But, as far-fetched and unbelievable as it was, historical events actually happened, exactly as the historicist commentators on Revelation 16 had predicted. In August 1914, shortly after the outbreak of World War I, the Ottoman Empire signed a secret military alliance with Germany, which promised support in exchange for joining the war on the side of the Central Powers. The alliance was motivated by mutual interests in challenging their common enemies, particularly Russia. On October 29, 1914, the Ottoman Empire officially entered World War I by launching an attack on Russian ports in the Black Sea. This marked the beginning of their active involvement in the war alongside the Central Powers. The secret military alliance between the Ottoman Empire and the German Reich was known as the Ottoman-German Alliance, and it was signed on August 2, 1914, just one day before the Ottoman Empire entered World War I. Literally overnight. The Ottoman government kept the alliance secret from the public and the other European powers until the Ottoman declaration of war on Russia on November 2, 1914. Despite suspicions, the formal announcement of the unlikely Ottoman-German alliance, and the Ottoman Empire's entry into the war as part of the Central Powers, still caught many allies by surprise. The Ottoman Empire's first military target after signing the Ottoman-German alliance was the Russian port of Odessa in the Black Sea. The Ottomans launched their attack on October 29, 1914, just 3 months after signing the secret alliance with Germany on August 2, 1914. The attack on Odessa marked the Ottoman Empire's formal entry into World War I, as part of the Central Powers, joining Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Ottomans aimed to seize the port of Odessa, which was a significant Russian naval base and an important strategic location on the Black Sea coast. The Ottoman Empire's attack on Odessa did not succeed. The Ottoman attempt to capture the Russian port of Odessa in 1914 was ultimately repelled by Russian forces. The Ottomans faced numerous challenges during the campaign, including logistical difficulties, insufficient naval support, and unfavorable weather conditions. The Russian Black Sea Fleet also played a crucial role in defending Odessa and disrupting Ottoman supply lines. As a result, the Ottoman forces were unable to achieve a breakthrough or capture the port. The Ottoman attempt to take Odessa ended in failure, and they were forced to withdraw their troops from the area. The Ottoman Empire's decision to align with the Central Powers was a culmination of internal and external factors, including nationalist sentiments, geopolitical calculations, and the allure of forming strategic alliances. However, this decision would ultimately have profound consequences for the Ottoman Empire, as its involvement in World War I would lead to its eventual dissolution, and the end of its centuries-old existence, as a significant political entity in the aftermath of the war. After its defeat in the Battle of Megiddo, or Armageddon, a Nazi propaganda radio station broadcasted programs in the Arabic language, and was known as Zissen Radio or Zissen Radio Berlin. The station was operated by Nazi Germany's Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, headed by Joseph Goebbels. Zissen Radio was established in Zissen, near Berlin, and began its broadcasts in 1939, targeting audiences in the Arab world, including North Africa and the Middle East. While there were elements of sympathy for Hitler in the Muslim world, despite the Nazi propaganda coming out of Berlin in the 1930s under Hitler, there were no majority Muslim countries that sided with the Axis powers in the conflict in World War II. The alliance between the Second Reich and the Ottoman Empire had collapsed. The prophecy of Armageddon had been fulfilled, and the former military alliance between the German Reich and the Ottoman Empire had vanished almost overnight in 1918. As the empires, which played out these prophecies between 1914 and 1918, no longer even existed. So how did these historical events fulfill the prophecies about Armageddon written about in the book of Revelation? And how did the Battle of Armageddon actually come to pass, historically? That is what we will discover next. As was mentioned in the earlier video, on the astronomical dating for chapter 16, there were numerous signs in the heavens about Armageddon. So many so, that they could not all be covered in the abbreviated video on the entire chapter. There were so many multiple signs in the heavens, introduced on the section on the text on Armageddon, that covering them had to be deferred to this video. On the short section of the texts in Armageddon, there were 5 events that were astronomical signs in the heavens, all having to do with the sign of Venus, or what is called Noga in Hebrew. In John's revelation, Christ is twice given the astronomical value of Noga. First, he is given that value in chapter verse 27 and 28, stating, quote, "And he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter, shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. And I will give him the morning star." End quote. And then at the end of the book in chapter 22, verse 16, where John records, quote, "I Joshua, have sent mine messenger to testify unto you these things in the ecclesia. I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star." End quote. The first text is a reference to messianic authority, and the second is where it is given as the sign of the son of David. That was significant, because Noga was the name of the son of David mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 7, and 1 Chronicles 14, verse 6. Why is this significant? Because Noga was said to be the son of David, born to David in Jerusalem, where he reigned 33 years. Which was the same age of Christ, in Jerusalem, when he was crucified. So there was an historical parallel to this symbol. It is a use, as an astronomical value, that points directly to the city of Jerusalem, and you will see how all this is extremely important. In Luke, chapter 21, verse 24, Christ prophesied, quote, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." End quote. And that will be the entire point of what you will read concerning Armageddon. It has nothing to do with Ezekiel 38, which were all already fulfilled in history, prior to the New Testament. Nor does it have anything to do with Revelation 9, which was fulfilled in history in the Byzantium Empire. Nor does anything in Revelation 14 have anything to do with Armageddon, which is completely absent for chapter 14. Which is all about the wine of Babylon. And which was fulfilled in the destruction of Antioch, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. We will go over these astronomical symbols, and what they mean in the scriptures, prior to their use as astronomical signs in the heavens, in the 5 occurrences. We already mentioned the significance of the bright and morning star. The next important astronomical sign in the heavens is the mention of the Lamb in Revelation, which occurs 29 times in the texts. You saw in previous texts, the phrase "the Lamb on Mount Zion," in chapter 14, was Aries, at a 45-degree incline, in the sky. In these coming texts, a double sign in the sky, of Noga, the son of David, and the Lamb, one being Mount Zion, where the Jewish martyrs were killed in 70 AD, and the previous pointing to Jerusalem, which will mark the completion of the age of the Gentiles. Another sign is the lion, which is the constellation Leo, and is mentioned 4 times in Revelation. It is also identified with Christ by John, in his statement, in Revelation chapter 5, verse 5, quote, "And one of the elders saith unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book, and to loose the 7 seals thereof." End quote. In chapter 11, you were already also made aware of the significance of the 2 witnesses, their association with the constellation Gemini, and their role in history. The goat is a sign of the biblical sin offering, offered as the scapegoat for the nation of Israel's sin. Astronomically, that is the constellation Capricorn. It is a symbol of a debt that is paid, and of freedom, as goats were also symbolic of freedom. As being no longer in debt to sin. Virgo is the seed of the woman that the Messiah was prophesied to be, in Genesis, chapter 3, verse 15, quote, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." The crown is mentioned 5 times in Revelation, and 93 times in the Bible. That is also a symbol of the messianic crown of Christ. crown as indicated astronomically by Saturn. And all of these signs in the heavens occur in a series of 5 major astronomical events on our historical timeline, from the year 1914 to the year 1918. Now that we have covered a few of these astronomical symbols, next, we are going to cover each of these astronomical events, and when they occur. The first series of Noga or Venus signs, in the heaven, occurs at 10:00 a.m., on June 28, 1914. It has Venus over the head of Leo, in the claws of the crab, and in Leo, there is a black moon, with Mars. The crab's claws indicates there will be a power grab, by the claws, and the black moon, aside Mars, indicates a deadly conflict. And you have already seen before, the appearance of the meteor shower of June Boots, indicates the martyrs, in Boots. Boots is astronomically, the Reaper. The second series of Noga or Venus signs, in the heavens, occurs at 7:30, April 2, 1917. There is a quadrilateral planetary alignment on a 45-degree incline on the horizon in Aries, as the Lamb on Mount Zion, and the constellation Pisces. The alignment comes with Jupiter, or Zodiac, meaning righteousness, Mercury or Kikab, meaning a message, Venus or Noga as Christ, and Mars or Mal-Adam, meaning conflict or war. Bullinger reports, among the brightest Pisces stars, was one in Hebrew, pronounced, Okda, and meant, united. As they are tied, from the tails of the 2 fishes. And this, ironically, occurred on April 2nd. The third series of Venus or Noga signs, occur at 11:43 a.m., near the middle of the day, on December 11, 1917. It consists of Venus in Capricorn, with Uranus, which is the Greek word for heaven, and something seen with the label Juno. Juno was a very bright asteroid discovered in 1804, 2 years before the defeat of the Holy Roman Empire, by Napoleon. This asteroid is so large, that on its own, it is responsible for 1% of the total mass, of the entire asteroid belt, of which there are thousands of. Although it was another constellation, named by Germans after another Roman god, it signaled the demise of the Holy Roman Reich, and its astronomical symbol was notated with a scepter and a star on top of it. Which is certainly an odd symbol for Juno, or even an asteroid in general. But the scepter is mentioned twice in the Bible, in Numbers 24:17, which states, quote, "There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of tumult." And in Psalm 45:6, quote, "Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever, the scepter of thy kingdom is a righteous scepter." End quote. In both texts, the scepter is an overt symbol, for messianic rule. The fourth Venus or Noga sign in the series, occurs on September 19, 1918. This is a tertiary planetary alignment, with Venus or Noga, as Christ, Mercury or Kokab, as messenger, and Saturn or Subte, as the crown, with the bright star Regulus which mean prince, all in Leo. As in the Lion of Judah, which occurs on September 19, which was 2 days after Yom Kippur, in 1918. And the fifth Venus or Noga sign, in the last in the series, occurred on October 31, 1918. Venus occurs on the heel of Virgo as the prophecy in Genesis 3:15, quote, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." Over the head of Noga, is the crown Subte or Saturn, in Regulus the prince, in Leo, as the Lion of Judah. With the new moon, in the constellation Crater. The constellation Crater, refers to wine. Now, we will see, what these signs, in the heavens, actually meant. As previously mentioned, John's astronomical dating gave us 5 astronomical events on the historical timeline, with which to locate these 3 parenthetical verses in Revelation 16. The 5 dates were 1. June 28, 1914, 2. April 2, 1917, 3. December 11, 1917, 4. September 19, 1918, and 5. October 31, 1918. So what happened on these dates, on the historical timeline, a prophecy? The first sign, occurred at 10:45 a.m., on June 28, 1914, with Venus over the head of Leo, in the claws of the crab, and in Leo, is the black moon, with Mars. The crab's claws indicated there would be a power grab, and the black moon, with Mars, indicated there would be a deadly conflict. The meteor shower of June Boots indicated the martyrs, in Boots. And Boots was seen astronomically as the Reaper. On the very day of June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo took place on June 28, 1914, at approximately 10:45 a.m. local time. Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist, shot and killed the Archduke and his wife, Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, while they were traveling in a motorcade through the streets of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina at that time. This event is widely regarded as the catalyst for the chain of events that led to the outbreak of World War I. The Serbian nationalist who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was Gavrilo Princip. He was a member of a secret nationalist organization known as the Black Hand, which stood for Unification or Death, in Serbian. The Black Hand was a revolutionary group, founded in Serbia, with the goal of promoting the unification of all South Slavs under the Kingdom of Serbia. The organization was involved in various acts of terrorism and political violence, and its members sought to break away from Austria-Hungary and establish a Greater Serbia. Princip's assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, on June 28, 1914, was one of the most infamous acts carried out by the Black Hand, and served as the immediate trigger for the outbreak of World War I. The tensions between various European powers and their intricate alliances quickly escalated, leading to a declaration of war. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, sparking a chain reaction of declarations among the major powers, including Germany, Russia, France, and Britain, culminating in a devastating global conflict that lasted until November 11, 1918. The second sign, in the heavens, occurred at 7:30 a.m. on April 6, 1917. There was a quadrilateral planetary alignment on a 45-degree incline on the horizon in Aries, as the Lamb on Mount Zion. The alignment came with Jupiter, or Zadek, meaning righteousness, Mercury or Kikab, meaning a message, Venus or Noga meaning Christ, and Mars or Ma'atam, meaning conflict or war, and among the brightest Pisces stars, was one in Hebrew, named Okta, and meant united. This amazing alignment occurs on the early morning hours at 7:30 a.m. of April 2, 1917. So what happened on April 2nd at 7:30 a.m. in the morning of the year 1917? At exactly 7:30 a.m., President Woodrow Wilson spent his morning preparing for the most important speech he would likely give in his entire life. He met with advisors, rehearsed his remarks, and fine-tuned the language to present his case for declaring war against the German Reich, and his final preparations before addressing a joint session of Congress, exactly 1 hour later, that very morning, at 8:30 a.m. Exactly 1 hour later, President Woodrow Wilson went on to address the joint session of Congress at 8:30 a.m. on April 2, 1917. In his speech, he asked Congress to declare war against Germany, marking the United States' entry into World War I. The United States had remained neutral in the early years of the war, but German aggression from the Reich, including unrestricted submarine warfare and the sinking of American ships, along with the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, which was a diplomatic communication proposing a German-Mexican alliance against the United States, made this material fact impossible for the United States to tolerate any longer. Congress subsequently approved the declaration of war, and the United States officially joined the Allied powers in their fight against the Central Powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The decision to enter World War I had significant ramifications for American society, the economy, and its global standing, and it marked a turning point in the nation's history, as it shifted from isolationism to becoming a major player on the world stage. On April 6, 1917, the United States officially entered World War I, at 1:18 p.m. Washington time. This was when the U.S. Congress passed the joint resolution declaring that a state of war existed between the United States and the German Reich. President Woodrow Wilson signed the resolution into law shortly thereafter. With this declaration, the U.S. formally entered the war on the side of the Allied powers, joining the ongoing conflict that had been raging in Europe since 1914. America's entry into the war tipped the balance in favor of the Allies, primarily France, Britain, and Russia. The American intervention provided a significant boost to the Allies' resources, manpower, and industrial capacity. The U.S. mobilized its vast resources and quickly expanded its military forces, sending hundreds of thousands of troops to Europe. This influx of fresh troops and supplies revitalized the weary Allied forces. Moreover, American forces brought new military strategies and equipment, including tanks and aircraft, which further bolstered the Allies' capabilities. The United States' entry also played a psychological role, boosting morale among the Allies and dealing a blow to the Central Powers of the German Reich, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. The third series of Venus or Noga signs occurred on December 11, 1917, at 11:45 a.m. It consisted of Venus in Capricorn, with Uranus, which is the Greek word for heaven, and the asteroid Juno, depicted as a scepter with a star on top of it. So what happened on the timeline of history? On December 11, 1917, 2 days after the capture of Jerusalem by British forces under General Edmund Allenby, a formal ceremony was held to mark the city's liberation. General Allenby, in a symbolic gesture, dismounted his horse and entered the old city of Jerusalem on foot through the Jaffa Gate. This act was to show respect for the sanctity of the city and its religious significance to various religious communities throughout the world, and to mark the end of the jizya tax the Ottoman Empire collected against other non-Muslim religions, including Jews and Christians. British forces, under the command of General Edmund Allenby, had captured the city of Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. This event marked a significant milestone in the Sinai and Palestine campaign, which aimed to secure control over the region and protect vital supply routes to India. After months of military operations and strategic planning, General Allenby's forces successfully breached the city's defenses, leading to the surrender of the Ottoman garrison. The Ottoman Empire had controlled Jerusalem since 1517, and its defeat represented a notable victory for the British and their allies in the Middle Eastern theater of World War I. The capture of Jerusalem was met with a sense of triumph and celebration among the British and Allied forces. It was a critical turning point in the conflict and had a profound impact on the political and territorial landscape of the region. British forces, led by General Edmund Allenby, had conducted a successful military campaign against the Ottoman Empire, ultimately leading to the liberation of Jerusalem from the control of the Ottoman Empire and its religious tax against other faiths. This event had profound historical and cultural significance, as Jerusalem was considered a pivotal victory in the overall war effort against the Central Powers of the German Reich and Ottoman empires. The liberation of Jerusalem was a historic event during World War I, as it marked the end of centuries of Ottoman rule and the beginning of British administration in the region. The city's capture had significant implications for the course of the war and the eventual reorganization of the Middle East under the British and French mandate. The fourth Venus or Noga sign in the series occurred on September 19, 1918. This was a tertiary planetary alignment, with Venus or Noga as Christ, Mercury or Koukeb as messenger, and Saturn or Sabte as the crown, with the bright star Regulus, which meant prince, in Leo, as in the Lion of Judah, which occurred on September 19, 2 days after Yom Kippur, in 1918. So what happened on September 19, 1918? On September 19, 1918, during World War I, the Battle of Megiddo, also known as the Battle of Armageddon, began as part of the larger Sinai and Palestine campaign. The battle took place in the region of Megiddo, which is located in present-day Israel. It was a decisive military engagement between the Allied forces, led by General Edmund Allenby of the British Empire, and the Ottoman Empire's forces. The Battle of Megiddo, also known as the Battle of Armageddon, was a significant offensive launched by the Allies, with the goal of breaking through the Ottoman defensive lines and advancing northwards into Palestine and beyond. General Allenby's forces utilized innovative military tactics, including the use of cavalry and infantry, to to outflank and overwhelm the Ottoman positions. The fifth Venus, or Nova sign, and the last in the series, occurred on October 31, 1918. Venus was positioned on the heel of Virgo, as the prophecy in Genesis 3:15 stated, quote, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." End quote. Over the head of Noga was the crown Subte or Saturn, with Regulus the Prince, in Leo, as the Lion of Judah. So what took place on October 31, 1918? On October 31, 1918, during World War I, the Ottoman Empire signed the surrendering armistice with the Allied powers, marking the end of hostilities on the Middle Eastern front. The armistice agreement was negotiated and signed at the port city of Mudros, on the island of Lemos, in the Aegean Sea. The Armistice of Mudros signaled the Ottoman Empire's surrender to the Allies, effectively ending its involvement in the war. The agreement was signed by representatives of the Ottoman government and the commanding officers of the British and French forces. As part of the armistice terms, the Ottoman Empire agreed to demobilize its military forces and withdraw from several territories it had occupied during the war. The armistice paved the way for the peace negotiations that would be held at the Paris Peace Conference, where the future borders and political arrangements of the region would be determined. The final peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Sevres, was signed in August 1920, leading to the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of new states in the Middle East. The final Battle of Megiddo, or Armageddon, proved decisive in bringing about the surrender of both the Second Reich and the Ottoman Empire. The battle commenced on September 19, 1918, as part of the larger Battle of Sharon, during the Sinai and Palestine campaign. General Allenby's British forces, supported by the Allied powers, orchestrated a strategic and overwhelming attack against the Ottoman Empire. The battle culminated in the surrender of the Ottoman Empire on October 30, 1918, the subsequent signing of the Mudros Armistice on October 13, along with the subsequent surrender of the Second Reich by Germany on November 11, 1918. These surrenders marked the end of World War I, a conflict that reshaped the world's political landscape and laid the groundwork for future geopolitical developments for all future generations. The combined efforts of the Allies, including the United States, eventually pushed back the Central Powers on various fronts. The war ended on November 11, 1918, with the signing of the Armistice of Compiègne, leading to the defeat of the Central Powers and the ultimate victory of the Allies. The entry of the United States into World War I played a pivotal role in tipping the balance in favor of the Allies, and hastening the end of World War I. The British Mandate for Palestine, which was established by the League of Nations in 1920 and lasted until 1948, played a significant role in facilitating the return of Jews to Palestine. The mandate's provisions, coupled with various historical and political factors, contributed to the establishment of a Jewish homeland in the region. So now, you have seen that the primary elements of the historicist interpretation, from the prophecies in Revelation, actually really did see the forces of the Reich and Mohammedanism combined for a decisive battle at Megiddo, in which these combined forces would be defeated by opposing Christian powers. And out of this conflict would come the end of the age of Gentile rule in Jerusalem, with a way for the Jews to return to their homeland in Palestine. And that was all that historicists predicted about the Battle of Armageddon, as far back as a number of centuries before these events were not even feasible in the geopolitics of these previous empires. So, what if you are now a counter-reformationist, futurist, looking at the completed history of the Battle of Armageddon, based on the historicist interpretation of eschatology? With no rapture, and no zombies, and no bottomless pits, and no future Superman Antichrist? What do you do with your theology? Do you just admit you were wrong? Or do you do something a little more exciting to keep the delusions still going? That is what you will find out next. In this video, you have seen that the Counter-reformation eschatology, known as rapturism, has never in the history of Christianity ever prophesied or predicted anything accurately from its very earliest conception. Not once. And on the other hand, the one item in prophecy that rapturism claims for itself was actually stolen prophecy from historicists, which did happen and they intentionally attempted to bury, because their fictitious rapture did not occur. Preterism and futurism constitute 2/3 of the theological universe, to hide the contents of the book of Revelation. And, as mentioned in previous videos, both preterism and futurism were invented to hide the fact that the papacy was infamously, and very well known, to have been the Antichrist. Consequently, today, the two major schools of eschatology known as preterism and futurism, actually in reality, create two evil twins, whose only purpose in the earth is deception. Both have no purpose, other than to hide the Antichrist. Both were invented by Jesuits for precisely that purpose. Both shift time frames out of real history. Preterism makes it all go away, to Nero, which John flat out contradicts. And futurism claims it's all in the future, squeezed into a very little time frame, of a fictitious imaginary 7 years. Both ignore the plain grammar of the texts. The time frames are in the actual texts, as both past in some cases, and future in others. Both ignore the stated intent of the author. John says he is going to prophesy what will quickly come to pass, which is neither past or far away in the future. Both rely on incredulous claims. Futurism predicts magical superstitious fantasies, and preterism claims John thought everything was Nero, despite his very clear descriptions that aren't that. Both have no conception of salvation. They have no conception of salvation, because they aren't saved. And their religious works are for commercial profits only. Both have been openly rejected by previous historical Christians. Every single historical Christian denomination knew what the Antichrist was, and rejected any attempt to hide that fact. And both deny the necessity of reformation, which the scriptures actually command in the very book of Revelation. If you invite the two evil twins in for a Bible study, they will suck out your brain, and you will lose your soul. Do not give them the time of day, even if you have heard all your life that these are okay. Don't believe it. It will accomplish in any Christian precisely what they were intended to do, which is nullify your Christianity and ruin you spiritually. After the fulfillment of Armageddon prophetically, from history, the con artist and fraud, C.I. Scofield, went on to found Dallas Theological Seminary, to further spread his counter-reformation brainwashing throughout the country. After Billy Graham became a millionaire, preaching his false gospel, and spreading the delusion of Jesuit futurism, he bought the rights to Haley's Bible Handbook, and afterwards, against the protests of his family, took the section on the Jesuits out of the publication. Because Billy Graham knew that was where he was getting his eschatology from. But he didn't want his audiences to know that too. In the next video, we will continue examining the historical timeline of the 7 saucer judgments, resuming with the 5th saucer, the judgment of darkness, on the throne of the beast. Thank you for watching.